Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors that we see in the Netflix series Ozark, specifically looking at the personalities of Martin and Wendy Byrde and the representation of bipolar disorder we see in the character Ben Davis, Wendy Byrde's brother. Now, Ozark follows the story of a financial advisor and white-collar criminal named Martin Byrde and his family as they move from Chicago to Osage Beach, Missouri, on the lake of the Ozarks. They have a number of adventures as they try to advance their money laundering activities and interact with the local population. In this series, there are some shots of the actual lake of the Ozarks, but the majority of the show is actually filmed in Georgia, specifically in Atlanta and Savannah. So first I'll give a quick timeline of the first 3 seasons because that's all that's available at the time I'm making this video. And there will be spoilers, of course, in the summary. After that, I'll analyze Martin and Wendy Byrde, as well as the Ben Davis character, and I'll provide some overall thoughts I have about the series, Ozark. So looking at the summary, we see here a Chicago financial advisor named Martin Byrde and his partner launder money for a drug cartel. Byrde's partner was stealing from the cartel, so he was murdered. But the cartel allowed Byrde to remain alive if he traveled to Missouri and set up a money laundering operation for them. Byrde abruptly moves his family, which includes his wife Wendy, his daughter Charlotte, and his son Jonah, to Missouri, where he immediately starts to make inroads with local businesses through which he can launder money. He also encounters the local criminal population, including the Langmore family and Jacob and Darlene Snell, who grow and distribute heroin. Byrde eventually hires Ruth Langmore to run some of his operations and gets into a joint venture involving a casino with the cartel and the Snells. Early on, we see Wendy takes an active role in the criminal enterprise as she and Marty get involved in a number of stressful situations that include violence, murder, betrayal, family strife, and dealing with the FBI, who is investigating their activity. A number of key characters are killed off by the time we reach the end of Season 3. Just to name a few, the cartel's attorney, Helen Pierce, Ruth Langmore's father and uncle, an FBI agent named Roy Petty, who was investigating the Byrdes, Mason Young, a local pastor, a cartel lieutenant named Del Rio, Martin and Wendy's counselor, Sue Shelby, and Wendy's brother, Ben Davis. So that takes care of the summary. So now let's take a look at the mental health and personality factors with Marty, Wendy, and Ben. Now, I'll be using the 5-factor model for some of this. I remember the 5 personality factors through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I'll also be looking at the Dark Triad traits. This would include psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. So first taking a look at Martin Byrde, also known as Marty. So Marty is a fairly interesting character. One challenge, I think, with a show like this is keeping a character's behavior consistent with their personality profile. Now, some shows have had a lot of success by having a character change. One notable example is Walter White in Breaking Bad. But most shows simply apply the character's personality to a variety of stressful situations. If a character starts to behave in a manner inconsistent with their personality, the show becomes less believable. Ozark generally keeps Marty's behavior consistent with his personality. His personality profile is mid-range, openness to experience, very high conscientiousness, mid to low extroversion, mid-range agreeableness, and low neuroticism. Marty appears to have characteristics of Factor 1 psychopathy. He's cold, unemotional, lacks remorse, he's manipulative, and he has superficial charm. I think all of these traits really come through very well in the performance given by Jason Bateman, who plays Martin Byrde. Really an excellent performance. We see these times where Marty is attempting to empathize, and it really just falls flat, like it was perfunctory, like he was saying it because he had to. It's almost like he's annoyed that he has to pretend to empathize, which is exactly what we would expect to see in someone who scores high in Factor 1 psychopathy. So again, the acting is pretty good. So what about pathological lying? Well, we see that Marty does lie a lot, but he also makes an effort to avoid saying something untrue. It's like the type of deception he engages in is really not as active and more lying by omission. He doesn't really seem to have much in the way of factor 2 psychopathy. He's not particularly impulsive. He doesn't seem to be excitement-seeking. He doesn't have a parasitic lifestyle. He doesn't lack long-term goals. There's no evidence of behavioral problems when he was young. One could really make the argument for criminal versatility. However, he is really committing the same crime over and over for the most part. Now, he would qualify as having antisocial personality disorder if we were only to consider the symptom criteria, because he has repeated unlawful behaviors, consistent deceitfulness, and a lack of remorse. However, without conduct disorder symptoms before the age of 15, which is another criterion required for a diagnosis, he would not be eligible for antisocial personality disorder. So here we do see an inconsistency with his personality profile. Another kind of unusual area for his personality is narcissism. He's not particularly narcissistic. Most people who are psychopathic do have an elevated level of narcissism. We see that Marty only meets 2 of the symptom criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, being manipulative and lacking empathy. I think Marty's personality really connects with the construct of Machiavellianism. He pursues power and money, but not fame. He is focused on being successful. He wants to win. For example, we see that video game that he buys that he needs to beat. He couldn't beat it as a kid, so he wants to beat it as an adult. He does not seem to get as angry as he should for the circumstances. Related to this, he's not particularly invested in revenge. Rather, we see he's more pragmatic about meeting his goals. For example, we see his reluctance to be physically violent. Now, he does commit one homicide, Mason Young, but this appeared to be in the defense of his wife, Wendy, and it really shook him up. He has excellent impulse control. He's willing to delay gratification. He's goal-oriented, although he has evil goals, but again, that's what we expect with Machiavellianism. He plans for the long run. He does not lie unless there's a clear purpose to lying. He hides his true intentions and limits his communication. He knows when to stay quiet. He doesn't make the mistake of bragging. He weighs the consequences of committing crimes before he commits them. He's cynical about the value of friendship and cynical regarding people's motivations. And even when his life is threatened, he seems annoyed that his business is being interfered with. Of all the characters I've seen recently in the movies and on TV series, Marty is really one of the best representations of Machiavellianism. So this brings me to Wendy Byrde. Unlike Marty, who stays fairly static through the series, Wendy definitely changes through the first 3 seasons. Her personality, she's high in openness to experience, high in conscientiousness, high in extroversion. She has mid to low agreeableness and mid to low neuroticism. Except for the high conscientiousness, her profile matches with someone at a high risk to have an affair, and of course in this series she did. Her personality seems to change a little through the series. Most notably, her levels of agreeableness and neuroticism both decrease. Wendy doesn't appear to have a history of criminality. However, she adapts quite readily to a life of serious crime. Just like Marty, she doesn't seem to qualify for a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. Also like Marty, she seems to have more factor 1 psychopathic characteristics than factor 2. The large difference when looking at Wendy as compared to Marty is really around narcissism. Wendy does appear to be narcissistic. She has grandiosity, fantasies of incredible wealth and power. She believes herself to be special or unique. She has a sense of entitlement. She's manipulative. She lacks empathy, and she's arrogant. These traits tend to manifest more as the series goes on. Wendy becomes increasingly comfortable seeking power and wielding power over other people. She has moments where she does empathize, kind of breaking from her persona, but overall she grows more callous. A classic example of the struggle between her empathy and her self-centeredness is her decision to notify Helen about Ben's location. She didn't want for her brother to be killed by the cartel, but she was willing for that to happen to protect her interests. She could have gone into witness protection at any time in the series. She always had a way out, but she wasn't going to give up her dreams. This takes me to an analysis of Ben Davis, Wendy's brother. Now, Ben was supposed to have bipolar disorder, and this became a major focus of his character development right up until the time he was murdered. I really didn't like the way bipolar disorder was represented in this character. It really didn't match with the reality of the disorder. Here are my thoughts on this. When we're first introduced to Ben, he's a substitute teacher, and he acts impulsively, destroying property and attacking a man. Next, we see him show up in Missouri. He seems relatively calm, lucid, he has good insight, he's compliant, alert, and goal-oriented. However, he's still a little bit impulsive. In theory, at this point, he's in a euthymic phase, so he's not depressed and he's not manic. He's in between. I'm not sure what the series was really trying to do here. He committed a violent crime, and then he went to being calm again. I really don't see a sufficient reason that he would have been aggravated to the point of violence when he was a substitute teacher, but then relatively compliant when he was in Missouri. It's technically possible, but again, it's not really expected. Next, he falls in love with Ruth Langmore. He stops taking his medication. I don't believe the name of the medication was ever mentioned. After this, he quickly decompensates and becomes exceedingly impulsive and violent, committing multiple felonies in the span of a few days. I think the series was trying to portray him as manic. The problem here is that this isn't really how bipolar disorder tends to function. Now, stopping medication without the approval of a prescriber is not advised, but just because somebody stops it, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go directly into a manic episode. Usually when we see this alignment, stopping the medication and a manic episode, it's because the manic symptoms were coming through and the person stopped the medication because of those symptoms. The other problem here is his extreme paranoid and violent reaction. Mania can definitely be irritable, and sometimes people who are manic can be violent. Mania isn't always euphoric, but the level of violence we see here is really atypical. Furthermore, his mania seems to subside, and then he's left in a childlike and vulnerable state. He's emotionally immature, lost, and he has a marked lack of insight. He doesn't really seem to understand how the cartel is trying to kill him. After a manic episode, we would expect somebody to return to a euthymic phase or enter into a depressive episode, not enter into some type of awkward psychosis characterized by hypersensitivity and helplessness. I think the series was really trying to make Ben look pathetic, as to amplify the ambivalence that Wendy would feel when she was deciding to have him killed. So overall with this character, this was a dangerously poor representation of bipolar disorder, only really promoting the stigma that people with this disorder are somehow erratic and violent, and that other people should be afraid of them. So I didn't really like how they portrayed this. So that takes care of the mental health and personality factors. What about my thoughts about the series Ozark? Well, overall, I really liked the series. I think it was well written and well acted. Let's take a look at some of the positives and negatives. On the positive side, there's a lot of action. It's fast-paced without seeming rushed. There's great acting by pretty much every person in the series. We see a good mixture of subplots that tap into a wide range of interests. The whole story with the money laundering supplies a view into the world of organized crime. The scenery in the series is beautiful. The lakes and the rivers are really nice for a change. We don't see that too often in series like this. I think the show addressed the issue of Wendy's affair with some level of depth. We saw the hurt that she caused to Marty. It really pierced his typically strong outer shell. We see an interesting portrayal of the anti-hero. Martin Byrde causes destruction and damage while thinking that he's helping people out. I like the metaphor of the casino, although I'm not sure it was intentional, but I find it interesting that the casino really allows the Byrdes to share their pain with the whole community. They're dragging everybody down. Because of course people that go into casinos gamble money and lose. I also like in the beginning of the show how they have the O with the 4 drawings of objects that we see in the show. It's a small thing, but it's quite clever. I make a little game of it trying to memorize those objects and find them in the show. In essence, kind of adding stress to the whole viewing experience. It's my high conscientiousness converting what would otherwise be a pleasant viewing experience into an anxiety-provoking challenge. Now, that's not the fault of the series. That's something that I do because of my personality. Now, looking at the negatives. It's unrealistic. Like, this is the land of unsolved crimes. We see all these murders occur in this one area and no effective investigation. So that wouldn't really happen. We see the misrepresentation of bipolar disorder that I talked about before, the Ben Davis character. And we see, I think, the overuse of homicide. I understand that killing off characters brings excitement to the show, and it seems to propel the story forward. But I think in this case, they took this a little too far. For example, I thought the character of Jacob Snell really added a lot of interesting dynamics. So the benefit of eliminating characters can be realized, I believe, by killing off minor and mid-level characters. It doesn't always have to be the key players that are taken out in a series. So again, there are some negatives here, but overall, I really did like the series, and I'm looking forward to Season 4. Now, I know whenever I review the personality characteristics of fictional characters, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.